Greetings from London and from the London Institute for Contemporary Christianity, founded by John Stott to empower all God's people for fruitful mission and ministry in their everyday Monday to Saturday contexts. My name is Mark Greene, and as some of you know, I used to work in advertising, so you can trust every word you hear from me. Like you, I've been working for years now to seek to empower God's people for the workplace. But my son is graduating this Saturday. 2 down, 1 to go. So I can't be with you. But I've been asked to offer a few thoughts about the future of the workplace movement. The question is, what kind of movement does God want us to become? Up to now, we've been primarily a white-collar, male, business-oriented movement. But where God begins a movement and where he may want it to end up may be two very different things. He begins with Abraham, he ends up with all nations. I wonder, what is his vision for this movement? Is it to see every Christian business person equipped to make a contribution and live out the way of Jesus in their organisation? Or is it to see every Christian worker make a contribution and live out the way of Jesus in their workplaces? Now, these are very different because we can, as we've seen in many countries, develop a vibrant business movement without developing a vibrant workplace movement and without really ever engaging the local church at all. But we will not be able to create a movement that engages every Christian worker without the local church. So if we are to take seriously the calling of every worker, then the faith and work movement has to become a prophetic movement in several ways. First of all, we must summon the church to fulfill its mandate to disciple all God's people for their Monday to Saturday contexts. And to do that, we need to understand why the local church has never really embraced the calling to make disciples for work, why it has tended to relegate work to a church-approved special interest for the eager few, not for the many, why somehow work is seen as a topic to be addressed rather than a context to disciple people for. Yes, many churches are doing marvellous things in neighbourhoods and in communities. Yes, many churches pray fervently for global mission, but very, very few take seriously the need to disciple the 98% of God's people who are not ordained for the places they find themselves in God's world Monday to Saturday. Yes, over the last 10 years, we have seen progress and some amazing initiatives. But overall, the fact remains that the core mission strategy of evangelical churches worldwide remains pretty much the same as it was back in 2010 in Cape Town, when we put this slide up on the screen. To recruit the people of God to give up some of their leisure time to support the mission initiatives of church-paid workers. The key challenge for the local church, then, is not just to disciple workers for the workplace, but to disciple all God's people for their calling in the world, wherever that is, whatever their age, whatever they do. When kids know that they are princes and princesses of Christ in the corridors and classrooms of their schools, when teens understand when they choose their subjects the call of God on their whole lives, when college students choose their job, understanding their role in bringing shalom to their workplaces, to their towns and to their nations, understand their role in the Missio Dei and their role in participating with God in the renewal of all things, then we will no longer be a movement caught in an endless cycle of remedial education, but we will be liberated to explore new terrain, to contribute greater wisdom to the world's workplaces and greater shalom to the world's nations. Seek first to make whole life disciples, and all these workers will be added unto you. Now, if the workplace movement is to make its full contribution to the shalom of the nations, then we need to become a prophetic movement that speaks out on the equality of women in the workplace. And on the whole, we've been behind on that. If we are to be a prophetic movement that makes its full contribution to the shalom of the workplace and the nations, then we will need to live out and speak out on the equality of all people, regardless of race. And we have been behind on that too. We have to be a movement that speaks out for safe and healthy working conditions, for just reward for every worker right down the supply chain. Not just a middle-class movement, but a movement that shares God's heart to alleviate poverty, to combat corruption, and to create and show a better way. So we will be a movement that addresses economic factors. We'll be a movement that listens carefully to our brothers and sisters in the holistic mission movement, but also works to ensure that the holistic mission movement remains true to the call of its founders, to poverty prevention as well as poverty alleviation, to wealth creation as well as wealth distribution, and to becoming an economic action movement, not just a social action movement. Now, obviously, this is not the calling of every workplace ministry. We need workplace specialists. We need sector experts. We need theological acuity and doctrinal depth. Goodness, we need our biblical scholars. And we need resources that are just for the workers. Bible studies, apps, books, adult Sunday school courses, and so on. But we need those to be delivered into a church culture that is gripped by a whole life vision of the Missio Dei. So as we make our specialist contribution, we must do so in a way that celebrates the vital role of the local church and facilitates the pastor's task of making whole life disciples. Now, as it happens, the LICC team has spent the last 15 years working out how to help congregations become whole life disciple making communities. And you can explore that in the seminars led by Charles Hipsley, my colleague from LICC. But I think there is something much bigger at stake for the whole Lausanne movement here. What is at stake is the content of the gospel we live and the content of the gospel we share. Now, back in the 1940s, the great British writer, apologist and evangelistic broadcaster Dorothy Sayers bemoaned the failure of the church to engage in the world of work. I'm sure you're familiar with the quotation. She wrote, in nothing has the church so lost her grip on reality as her failure to understand and respect the secular vocation. She's allowed work and religion to become separate departments and is astonished to find that as a result, the secular world of work is turned to purely selfish and destructive ends, and that the greater part of the world's intelligent workers have become irreligious, or at least uninterested in religion. But is it astonishing? How can anyone remain interested in a religion which seems to have no concern with 9/10 of their life? Her point is not just about work. Her point is about the gospel, and it applies today. The failure to teach work well is part of a wider failure to offer a whole life gospel to believers and non-believers alike. No wonder non-believers are not gripped by the gospel. The gospel we often present does not include any compelling vision for the transformation of ordinary life. Who indeed would be interested by a gospel that ignores 9/10 of their life? We wonder why young people today are not gripped by the gospel. Maybe it's because the gospel we share with them is just too small. Does not the living word of God through Paul tell us that Jesus is the co-creator of all things, visible and invisible, in heaven on earth? Does not the living word of God tell us that God the Father sent the Son to reconcile all things to himself, to make shalom through his blood shed on the cross? All things, not some things. All things. God the Father doesn't just invite us to come to know his glorious Son so that we may spend eternity in his wondrous presence, but also so that we may live out his good purposes for us to his glory in every area of life. And so perhaps part of our role in the work movement is to summon the whole church back to a renewed understanding and sharing of the whole gospel. And perhaps part of our role as members of the Lausanne movement is to summon the whole movement back to that rich, full-orbed understanding of the glorious, liberating, whole-life gospel that so gripped our founding thinkers, René Padilla, Samuel Escobar, Billy Graham and John Stott. May the Lord establish the work of your hands here this week. Yea, may the Lord establish the work of your hands. Shalom to you all. Amen.